Yeah. So
You
what are we
said,
here?
what did you say? Utter Nonsense episode 3. You said
Part three. Part three. Yeah.
I also thought, another good title for this. I thought about this as I was before we got together. Was there was a news show on, I think, one of the networks, and it was called Reliable Sources. I think we call ours Unreliable Sources.
Unreliable sources.
I like that.
Armchair lawyers.
Yeah. You might allegedly.
Allegedly. Yeah. Allegedly.
Yeah. So
Well,
this is our.
Go ahead.
Before we start, this is our third episode. Not legal advice, of course. We're just talking. We are both lawyers, but we're not securities lawyers. We're trying to give you the best information, but we really hope that you make any decisions based upon your own decisions. And I would suggest that before you make any kind of major decision, that you go see some expert that you trust and get their opinion. And that way you'll feel better about whatever decision you make. Yeah. So go for it, JR. What were we going to say?
So the last time we talked, I think we talked about a variety of things, but one of the things that we talked about was, some type of potential communication from NextBridge. And I think we talked on Thursday, and the community was expecting something Friday. Yesterday was a holiday. Today's the end of the day. We've not seen anything. What are your thoughts on that, Richard?
Do you think that there might be somebody who's interested in that?
I'm sure. I know. Okay. I know at least 500 or so people that are.
Yeah. So when I said it, I had a certain belief that certain action was going to be taken, and I think the first step along those lines was Will Stewart came out and he said he gave out what his strategy was going to be, and he's obviously a very large shareholder, and that was, I would say, a brave and aggressive act, and I think that's good for all shareholders. And I perceived from my interactions with everybody else that represented kind of the start of a much more assertive and aggressive set of tactics on behalf of shareholders, either through NextBridge or other shareholders. So I was optimistic. And so after Will Stewart came forward, that seems like that's going to play out. In terms of like specific timing, again, we all would like to know specific timing, but we don't. But I feel good that he came out, because that was at least the first step, and I appreciate him coming out and taking a position. Whether you decide to do what he says, not financial, you got to make your own decision. And again, I would say if you're not sure on a decision that's a monumental decision for yourself, go seek some kind of advice from somebody you trust.
Right.
I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
I don't have an opinion on the whole transfer your shares, non-transfer your shares. The one thing that I've always been concerned with, which Drew asked my question last night to Will because I couldn't take a mic, was, this notion that transferring your shares to AST could have tax consequences out of an IRA or a Roth. Will gave a sound answer, but he had multiple caveats. Look, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a tax advisor. So I think Will had a good position to take in that regard, but I don't know if the IRS would accept that position. I would certainly like to do a little bit more research personally for myself before I go taking my shares out of my Roth and IRA and transferring them to AST. We know that AST is not a custodian in terms of retirement accounts like that. So there's still kind of this unanswered question. So personally, it's still an open topic for me that I bounce around in my mind. I will point out that Will had a lot of good things to say about you. I know we didn't really get to talk much today, but I was on the space, and he had a lot of positive feedback for you, Richard. So, and then he was on multiple spaces all night. So he definitely had a lot to say.
Yeah, obviously, I have contact with him, have had him for some time. And I know Drew, by the way, this is a shout out to Drew Diligence, because I know he's been pushing hard also and has had contact with a lot of the same people I have. And we all appreciate his work. But I kind of knew what he was intending. And he had kind of made a decision to now act and go forward. So he's an intelligent guy, and he intends to move forward, and he wants to protect his interests, and those interests I think are aligned with other shareholders. So hopefully that will all work out. But kind of like what you said, before you do any decision like that, you really
Right.
should get a opinion of somebody so that if it's the wrong decision, you have insurance. You're
Yeah.
not kind of left in. That's the way I always look at it. Sometimes like an hour of time might save you a lot of money in the long run. So
Right. Right.
that's my
Right. Right.
nice
Okay.
to see. I know that there was that Mark is also, and you may know better than I, that
Yeah.
Mark's now pursuing doing some additional litigation. Can you tell us a little bit about that? About
Yeah,
that?
so he was on a space this afternoon about 3 o'clock. I think he filed his intention to appeal the decision with the appellate court in the state of New York, which is that second level appeals court. He did give a little bit more background on kind of the process. It'll be a 3 judge panel, and he said that typically they give a specific allotted amount of time before they start barraging them with questions. So it'll we can expect to see something different at that level. And then Johnny Tobacco had a very in-depth conversation about kind of the appeal, that level of appeals, and how quickly things move. So we know that's happening. He was what was the word I used early? Sufficiently vague in talking about potential action against OTC markets, and he was sufficiently vague for a specific reason. Obviously, he can't really go into too much detail, but it appears as though he's contemplating or him and his client are contemplating some form of action against OTC markets. Now, where that goes, we'll find out at some point when he makes the filing. So, but yeah, he had some things to say that a lot of process and procedure questions were asked of him, but yeah, so he's chugging along.
Okay. I was going to say is that uh, only in social media is Johnny Tobacco a legitimate name.
Right,
You
right.
know,
It's great. It's
it
great. Well,
doesn't really make. That was like the thing that I discovered when I first kind of spent a lot of time. Any name goes, and it's all treated legitimately, no matter what.
yeah,
So Johnny Tobacco could be like a PhD from MIT.
that's right.
And it's. I always find that funny. Um, I just we weren't going to talk about this, but I got my packet from the Ninth Circuit on my appeal against
Got it.
FINRA. So I have like about 60 days to file my opening brief, approximately. I'm really looking forward to that, just to be honest. You can
Yeah, I
imagine.
bet. I
Okay.
bet.
Okay. Yeah. Part of kind of what spurred this, besides obviously MMTLP, and that's what we're both involved with amongst other things. Um, we found a case. There was an ongoing case, and I think Big JR, right? Big
Yes,
JR, not little JR.
that's
There
right.
was, I think, a GTII person, and along those, he sent us some pleadings, and it related to naked shorting. So we thought, who knows? Maybe
Right,
it'll be interesting. Yeah,
right.
yeah. So I know you've had opportunity at least to glance at some of the pleadings. What are your kind of conclusions?
So yeah, and again, shout out to Big JR. He's the one that's providing us with the information. I had not been following this case, and he texted me over the weekend some stuff, and I was like, "Hey, this is great. Go ahead and post when you can." And he was like, "Oh, I'm doing yard work." I said, "Okay, well, I think Richard and I are going to talk about it on a live stream because." I mean, it's interesting from a legal standpoint because there's so much going on, but it's extremely relevant to kind of what we're all in, whether it's MMTLP, GTII, doesn't matter. Pull a ticker out of the OTC market, and they're in it. So Sorrento and celiac is an interesting case. Tons going on procedurally. So celiacs or Sorrento filed for bankruptcy, and uh, the equity holders of Sorrento, right, came in and said, "Hey, we got screwed in this deal because all these broker dealers shorted the dividend to death, and the dividend of Celiax, which is a wholly owned Celiax. Celiax is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sorrento, and so the equity holders in Sorrento were like, "Whoa, this is this is not right. Something's wrong here. And Sorrento's in bankruptcy, yet they're the holder of the dividend. I think the dividend was roughly a 3 million share float, right? And so
Right.
somewhere in the bankruptcy, the actual bankruptcy proceeding of Sorrento, the equity holders filed a lawsuit against certain broker dealers. Now, I think you can speak to kind of how that works in the bankruptcy piece, correct?
Yes, yes. And, we're both not, amongst other things, again, I said unreliable sources. Neither of us are bankruptcy attorneys, so take this with a big grain of salt. But
Right.
the way it works, so you file the underlying bankruptcy case, and Sorrento was the parent, and Celix, or however you pronounce that, was a subsidiary of the parent.
Right.
So the parent filed Chapter 11, and that Chapter 11 is a reorganization. So they're not going to at least the intention when they start is they're not going to close down their company. They're going to try to work out a deal with their creditors and try to stay in business. That's kind of the idea.
Right.
And during that time they're in Chapter 11, they have protection from their creditors against their creditors suing them or doing anything against them. And that's called an automatic stay.
Right.
So as soon as they file that bankruptcy petition, there's an automatic stay that protects them. And for someone to take action that might impact the assets of that particular company, you need to go into court and make a motion and get relief from that stay.
Right. Let's
Um,
let's stop a second. Let's stop a second because that's important what you just said because Sorrento's one of Sorrento's most valuable assets is the ownership of celiacs.
Correct. And this kind of goes a little bit to what Ham, I think, professes, that what the impact is of naked shorting in terms of medical advances. So this company, ironically or not ironically, sinisterly or not, was basically it provided pain relief for people with chronic pain that was non-opioid related. So it was a different route. So obviously, an opioid pharmaceutical
Right.
market is a big market. So there might be some people that may not be interested in this company competing or surviving. I have
Really?
no idea.
Which
I have no
that's
idea if,
odd. That's so
yeah,
odd that there would be other organizations out there that would not be interested in something like this.
yeah. Again, I don't know if in this particular case that it applied, but you
Right.
know, shocking if it did. So so that's what happened. So this is the kind of company that you could certainly short out and basically put it out of business, and the shorts win and we lose.
Right.
And who knows if this is the particular company that's going to be the breakthrough. But if this is sheer volume. If you have enough companies, some of them are going to hit and provide breakthroughs for people. And so that's
Sure.
kind of like the thing that's the underlying concern, non-monetary, that we face. But what happened in this particular one is, so they filed the bankruptcy, and then during the bankruptcy, the basically the equity holders got together, they formed a committee, and that committee filed a complaint,
Yep.
like a lawsuit, in the bankruptcy, and that's called an adversarial complaint. So if you ever look at the pleadings, that's what you'll see.
Yep.
And there were a couple of claims basically alleging, kind of to sum it up, that there was naked shorts, and what procedurally happened is that committee went into court, tried to get a TRO to basically have those, uh, and these were brokers who were lending the shares, to have
Right.
them stop and have them cover. And there was a request, I think, for a monetary fine, but
Right.
it was a temporary order. The court granted that and ordered those particular entities to disclose their profits and the interest they had accumulated, I guess, by lending out the shares. And I think I saw somewhere in there that interest rates were as high as 300%.
Yeah.
So these
But
lenders,
but let's back up a second. Let's back up. You missed that one part back in April when all of this first started, and the judge required the broker dealers to provide their share accounts or to provide the accounts and the amount of shares that they had. Remember, that was back in April. And then that
Correct.
data led to where we're at right now.
Correct.
The
Correct.
complaint got
And
filed. Yep.
there was a conclusion, although I don't think it's been established as a matter of law or fact to this point in time. But when they basically took account of the shares of these brokers, and
Mm-hmm.
there were too many, and there were a
Right.
lot more shares than should have been on the market. And the court, I think, supported the conclusion, at least for the temporary restraining order, uh, that there were naked shorting, and that's why there were too many shares.
Right.
And from a legal standpoint, there's a difference and a different standard in a TRO and a preliminary injunction. So there's a greater showing required in a preliminary injunction.
Right.
But we're at the TRO stage, so the court might have been more inclined to grant the relief than not, but we don't know that yet.
Right.
But the court granted the relief, and so before, I think it was before the brokers had to disclose their profits, they filed an emergency petition in court. I think it was like very recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically to try to stop the preliminary injunction hearing from going forward.
Right.
They also attacked the conclusion that there was naked shorting, and they asked the court, as opposed to letting the hearing go forward, to hold a status conference.
Exactly.
Just basically, we'll meet and we'll decide from there.
Right. Right. I read that whole thing, and all I thought of is we need to have a meeting so that we can distract you over here instead of what's really in front of your face, which is the mind-boggling thing.
Yeah,
When I looked at the complaint today, the data is actually in there. I mean, the data's in there. You can't miss it. So I got to tell you, I would love to be on a fly on a wall for that meeting to hear what they say to the judge. I think the other thing too is I think this judge figured it out. I think the judge
yeah,
figured it out. The judge knows exactly why the company's broke. Companies broke because they couldn't go to the markets and raise capital because they were so badly naked shorted there was nothing else they could do. Hence why this equity committee did what they did. They knew exactly what was going on. So yeah, this one's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. But I tell you, I think these guys are going to get burned. You know.
no, I'm not. Yeah, so I thought about this today, and again, I preface this by I'm not a bankruptcy attorney, but I was thinking about, there are a lot of people in the MMTLP community that have been harmed, and some of them may have been wiped out, and some of them may qualify or have filed bankruptcy individually. And I know we talked about a lot of issues related to this. This was kind of a different angle I was thinking of. There may be people that are harmed that could file. For example, we talked about there's a difference between, oh, let me explain it again. There's a difference between a chapter 7 and a chapter
Chapter
11
11.
or a chapter 3. So a chapter 7 is you basically liquidate all your assets and you're out.
Right.
So you're giving up basically everything, although there's exemptions. But it's basically that as a thought process. A chapter 11 is for corporations and very wealthy individuals, and a chapter 13 is for private individuals, and that's basically a reorganization. So you're
Right.
basically filing to see if you can work out some kind of plan to deal with your debts. And aren't able to complete it, or you decide for other reasons not to complete it, then those petitions can be dismissed. So I was thinking, based upon this order from the judge, and depending how it turns out, if there is a precedent that in a bankruptcy that you can have access to that information, and in essence, it would be the debtor, excuse me, the
Yeah.
debtor who got wiped out, who would have a claim, basically, they got wiped out because of this situation, that maybe they would have access to that same information in the bankruptcy court, and might not be able to get that otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely an interesting theory, and uh, now they've got a potential federal precedent. So there's a judge out there that basically looked at this situation and said the company's broke. The company went broke primarily because the stock was naked shorted, and they're saying that because that dividend was, again, the biggest asset that Sorrento was holding, was that dividend.
Right. Right.
So there's certainly an argument to be made there. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, when we were talking about this, ultimately, we're concerned about, Skylex and Sorrento and their shareholders, but we're more interested in how it might apply to MMTLP and any other company that might be in the same position, because it might provide another route. Because
Right.
I don't think this has been available before this particular opinion.
So
So
let's
I'm
take a
suggesting, by the way,
let's take a second here because there's some confusion. I can see it in the comments. No, we are not talking about the judge in MMTLP. We are talking about the judge in Sorrento's bankruptcy case. We're not we're relating it back to MMTLP, but what we're talking the judge that we're talking about right now is what the judge said in the Sorrento bankruptcy case. I don't want there to be any confusion because I'm seeing questions pop up here. So go ahead, Richard.
yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, a lot of law is analogies. So you try to find something that is similar, and then you try to argue that. So
Right.
we fed the Sorrento cases out there, and because the judge made the brokers disclose the share count, we think that might yield some similar argument in MMTLP or something like that. And when I was relating to somebody who might file bankruptcy, I certainly, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting for anybody to file
Yeah.
bankruptcy. But if you happen to be in that position and you're in front of an attorney who's going to do it for you, you probably should have that discussion, because it might be a way of being very valuable to yourself and to others.
That's
So
right.
yeah, and we don't know, because we don't know how case is going to turn out. We don't know if it was how it's going to be, or if it's going to be appealed. But it was really interesting, and we haven't found very many cases where you can find the words "naked" from the court.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whenever,
And
yeah,
or
right,
the SEC. And now we've got one from the SEC and one from a federal court down in Texas, a bankruptcy judge, but it's still federal court.
right. So we know it. We're not. It's not imaginary anymore. We
That's
know
right.
it exists to some degree. So
Yay.
so that's yeah. So that's kind of why we are focusing on that case. And we've looked at some of the pleadings, obviously, and there's going to be additional pleadings filed, and I'm sure there will be a hearing. And I looked in the opposition that was filed. The defendants in that case, the brokers, were asserting that there had to be a lot of discovery undertaken, and
Yeah.
they're going to try to delay, obviously. And realistically,
Well,
there
they
may
did.
be some time.
They actually did delay. If you read the complaint, it talks about that they had to do a motion to compel to get them off their asses because they didn't provide
Right.
the data within the 24-hour period that the judge initially requested.
Yeah, as to the question about a bankruptcy attorney, I don't know. So you'd have to actually go in and ask. And again, especially if you have somebody you have past relationship with, or you have a trusted person that had a prior relationship with an attorney. That's how kind of I would go about it if it were me. But I don't know. As to the ultimate bankruptcy conclusion, I don't know. We were just interested in the judge's language, and again, uh, we weren't looking for a bankruptcy case. It just happened this was a bankruptcy case. And bankruptcy judges are federal judges, but they're slightly different than like the judge that I appeared before or Rosa appeared before. In that bankruptcy judges are appointed and are not there for life. And the district court judges, like I and Rosa appeared before, they're called Article 3 judges because that's the article in the Constitution, and they're there for as long as they want. So it gives them quite a bit of authority, which they often flex. But issued this opinion. And again, what we hope is, if the result continues in the manner it appears to be going, that it'll result in a conclusion that can be used in other cases and
Right.
can be presented in other courts.
Right.
Because the next time anything's filed, no matter what court you're in, if this is decided favorably, you're still going to bring it up, no matter what court it
Absolutely.
is in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's why we like it, and we'll see how it goes, and we're going to report on it as it goes on because we think it's important and might relate to MMTLP and GTII and all the other naked shorting. Mullen, I guess that one too. Um, so I wanted to talk briefly, and we talked about this also about Charlie and Zip Trader. So I like I said, I follow or review a lot of YouTubers, and I mentioned this one to you. So he happens to, and nice guy, maybe super accurate, perhaps, and he gives a lot of tips, like once a day, I think, on penny stocks.
Right.
So he did recently on one. I didn't buy it, of course, but he did. And the next day, which was today, I think, or yesterday, I don't remember when our conversation was, he sent out, he or somebody on his staff sent out an email to everybody that they had basically solicited and said, um, basically, that this was a sponsored security. So the Charlie of Zip Trader was being paid to promote this stock.
Right.
And lo and behold, the next day they did they did a stock raise. So they raised a bunch of money by selling a bunch of stock. And obviously the result is a dilution, the stock price dumps. And he sent out an email. The email said they didn't warn me they were going to do the stocks,
Right.
that dilution. And I said, that's very interesting because if they had warned you, that could be construed as insider trading.
Yep.
So I really didn't think that was a great response to justify the basically giving out, that's a bogus tip that really went south and you're being paid for it. That to me is problematic.
I would
Um,
agree with that. I would definitely agree with
okay.
that. I
Okay.
will tell you, when you told me that, I was not at all familiar with. I was not at all familiar with the guy. I'm just trying to pull our live chat up because I'm seeing a lot of questions come up, and I was thinking, shit, I can do this. I can answer some of these questions on my laptop as they're coming up. I was not at all familiar with that case when you shared that with me, like 10 minutes before the live stream started.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, so yeah, and we talked before. I don't really watch a whole lot of YouTubers. It just wasn't something I did. In fact, again, you and Tony now are really the only YouTubers I watch. So I wasn't at all familiar with that. But I'll tell you, when you were sharing that with me, all I'm thinking is, boy, that's not a good position to be in. You're giving out
No,
a
and I
stock,
know.
you're giving out a
I
tip, and
was
then
going
the
to say,
next day the company does a share offering.
and I'm not even, I'm not even blaming him per se for it. It's just,
Right.
it's a problem. It's a
Yeah.
problem.
It absolutely is
It's
a problem.
Yeah. You know, morally, I think morally you're responsible. Are you legally responsible? Maybe not. Maybe not. But it's called Zip Trader. That's what the name is, and he's got a lot of followers, probably like 600,000. It's a guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it bothered me. It really bothered me because people get taken advantage of. They see something. Listen, we've had the experience right with MMTLP. People go after things, and if they can be misled, right?
Yeah.
And obviously in this case, but on top of that, the excuse was just so bad. You know, there's you. That's not really. I don't think they've been advised by counsel to do that. Um,
That would be my guess.
Yeah. Um, I sent you something on that I have some familiarity with about Tom Girardi.
Yeah.
I know you chance to take a brief look at it. Any thoughts about that?
Well, when I look at situations like that, I just often wonder how attorneys go astray in that direction. And I've never represented anyone or never practiced law in the traditional sense. But we took an oath to the Constitution, and we all went through professional responsibility classes and then took the professional responsibility exam. And in Pennsylvania, we're required to get ethics credits every year. So every year I got to sit through an ethics education credit, and
Do
it
you really, you really go, between you and I, do you really go?
oh, yeah, I have. Well, yeah,
I,
what am I going to do? Lie on
no,
my CLEs? Hey, man, yeah, I
yeah,
went. Well, I'll
yes.
tell you what. No, so funny story. My best friend's wife is actually head of the Pennsylvania Bar, the State Bar Association's. Uh, I forget what her title is, but she's the one that determines whether attorneys get accepted to the Pennsylvania State Bar or get booted out. And so a number of years ago, I screwed up. I missed my deadline to apply for my license, and I was like, I went to do it thinking there would be like a $20 late fee. Hell, in the state of Pennsylvania, it doubles if you're late. Like they double it. So I called her up. I'm like, hey, is there anything you can do? She's like, no, pay it. Oh, okay.
Right.
so so yeah,
So you're saying that your experience is similar to Mr. Girardi? Is that what you're saying?
no, no, that's not at
Oh,
all what I'm
okay.
saying. What I'm
All
saying
right.
is that we go through this stuff every year. We sat for these exams. It was beat into our head that we are representatives of the court, and whether you're like you and you practice, or whether you're like me and don't practice, you still have that level of respect for not only the profession but what the profession means. And
Yeah.
when you read stories like that one that you shared with me, you shake your head and think to yourself, here's a high powered lawyer, very well known, embezzling money, embezzling his clients' money.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, so why don't you give a little bit background because you're more familiar with it than I am.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a big matter because it arose because there was claimed embezzlement on a plane crash. I don't know if you saw the case. There was a plane crash case, I
Yep.
think in Illinois, and and the I guess he's accused. He's a defendant in a criminal matter. He's been
Hmm.
disbarred. But he's a defendant in a criminal matter, so we'll leave it at that. He's accused, and he was lead counsel along with another firm. Excuse me, another firm in Chicago, and I think they settled the case. And I think funds were sent to his firm, and they weren't dispersed to the victims. And that's how this arose. That's how kind of this came about. And
Right.
as it turns out, his wife, I think, and him were on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I think that
Yep.
was it.
Yep.
Although I didn't see it. And they
Wait,
lived a very,
wait. That you missed that key word again. His estranged wife.
oh yeah, yes, yes, yes. Surprisingly, they're no longer together, and there was some age differential between the two of them.
Just a little.
Um, a little bit, okay. And anyway, they may have had a somewhat of expensive lifestyle, and I believe there's accusations that maybe some of the money that was allegedly embezzled um, was used to live that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I know this guy. I've met him before. Not only that, and this is like
Here and
super ironic.
herein lies the irony.
The irony. I know this guy taught legal ethics at one point in time. So okay. So and the guy, by the way, he also, and it's kind of like a mixed picture. He was, you ever seen the movie Aaron Brockovich?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
He was the one of the lead attorneys for plaintiffs.
Hmm.
So he successfully, it was a groundwater case. People were getting poisoned. So he did that. That was good. The second part, the latter part of his career, maybe not so nice. And he's now 83. He's he's got, I think, wire fraud are the claims because he
Yeah.
probably wired the money the accounts. And he had his defense to this point in time was that he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease.
Yep.
And so it was just decided. So, and he'd gone to some doctor. Doctor had agreed that he had Alzheimer's. The state made him go to one of their experts. experts said he may be a whack job, but he doesn't have Alzheimer's and he's competent to stand trial.
Yep.
So he's going to stand trial. And it made me think of that. I don't know if you remember that case in New York. There was a mafia guy who was pretending to be insane. So he would go to court every day in pajamas
Yeah.
and pretend he was out of his mind. And his defense was that he was crazy. The judge didn't agree, and he went to prison any day. But
yeah.
I don't think Girardi wore pajamas.
No.
So just
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah. They found him competent to stand trial, so he's going to trial on embezzlement, of course, unless he takes a plea deal of some type. But yeah,
Right.
I thought the whole story was interesting. But then when you told me that he taught ethics, that really brought it together for me.
Yeah. Now I'm going to pull it a little farther together. So I'm going to go back to MMTLP, and part of our concern is the regulatory.
Right.
How do they supervise what they're supposed to supervise? We all know FINRA does diddly squat, and the SEC is supervising FINRA. So you can draw your own conclusions as to how effective a job the SEC does in supervision.
Right.
But in this case, the state bar would be supervising Mr. Girardi. And, this wasn't a case that maybe Mr. Girardi might have had one or two complaints. I was reading the story, and there was a special letter that was sent out to all members of the California bar disclosing how the bar had handled this particular matter, because it turned out that the bar acted to disbar Mr. Girardi after the 204th complaint. So there had been 204 complaints that had been considered. That's excluding that there maybe have, and I bet you there was a lot more than 204 complaints that were discouraged, where somebody might have called in and they said, nah, and discouraged them. The reason why I say that is because in the letter that the state bar sent out to everybody, because there was a prior letter and it suggested maybe the state bar didn't do a great job in this particular matter. They did like 2 investigations. And in the investigations, they found and I don't remember the exact titles, but it was an interim director of the bar was compromised. An executive director was compromised. Some guy and his family was paid over $1 million by Girardi. I'm not talking about little money. There were lots of other people who had family members that were employed at his law firm. There's a whole series of things that is, corruption at its highest level. At least the bar has acknowledged it, so that I have to give them credit for that. But they and this is over probably a period of 15 years, and we don't know what the extent is of the misappropriation. We just know kind of what's in front of us now. But that is just an egregious job of supervising, and they just overlooked all those complaints. Again, I can understand 1, 2, 10, 50, 109, 203, but at 204, I draw the line.
Right. Well, it's like with FINRA and Alpine's violation of their permanent cease and desist order. It took them 32,000 times to violate that before FINRA decided to file, the second expulsion. So,
right. Yeah, they certainly don't act quickly,
no.
And we don't know specifically motivates them to act quickly, which is, a concern. And they certainly are not conciliatory in any way and take no responsibility, as we know.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was I wanted to do something a little different. I was going to do a little Tesla spiel. I don't know how much familiarity you have with that.
Honestly, not much. I mean, obviously, I know what Tesla is, what they do, and who Elon Musk is, but that's about the extent of my background on Tesla.
Okay, so there's basically 2 electric car manufacturers in the world that make money. Tesla, money, and BYD in China, which makes a very small amount of money. And it's hard to tell in China because there's a subsidy from the government, and there's an interesting policy. So Tesla, one thing that Tesla does that very few American car companies do is they direct sale to the consumer. So
Right.
there's no dealer involved. And as a result, the consumer gets a lower price because there's no markup to the dealership.
Right.
For example, if you went to buy a Ford Mach, and by the way, this is certainly not financial advice. If you went to buy like an electric, we're talking about electric, a Ford Mach E, there's a dealership, and the price that the dealer gets from the factory is different than what the dealer is going to sell it for. There'll
That's
be a
right.
big markup. A consumer standpoint, you're getting screwed because you're paying a lot of money. I understand from a dealership standpoint, they have employees and they want to stay in business. But that's quite a difference. So in China, um, there's dealers, but dealers have a tough time competing because the Chinese economy over the last year or two has kind of struggled, and they're kind of converting from gas to electric. So they're discouraging the use of gas cars. And they
Right.
have these really very strict standards that are like Europe, more than we have in our country. So certain cars that are gas that are allowable now won't be by the end of this year.
Right.
So there's quite a transition. But what happens is BYD, for example, sells to a dealer and they consider that a sale and they'll take some kind of profit. But the dealer can't sell the car because there's nobody to buy the
Because
car.
there's
There's
nobody to
not
buy the
enough of
car.
a
Right.
demand.
Right.
They just sit. So it's kind of like an imaginary debt, imaginary sales. So in reality, the only company that's producing electric vehicles at a at a substantial amount is Tesla. There's a lot of companies that are trying, but most are producing negligible amount. Like there's several Rivian,
Right.
Lucid, Polestar, Fisker. There's a bunch in China. Mercedes has some, BMW has some, Volkswagen, but they're really small numbers.
Right.
And eventually, I'm sure they will do it. But what's happened recently is Tesla has a lot of charging stations because they're kind of ahead of the game. So they
Right.
started producing a lot of charging stations, and they have a particular standard plug that was contrary to the plug the government was using and contrary to everybody else. And recently, Ford entered into an agreement with them to kind of go to their standard. And now they could use Tesla superchargers. And then it was GM, and then it was a bunch of other companies. Today it was Rivian. Rivian said they're going to do it. So in essence,
Okay.
now you have to pay a fee, but you go to a Tesla supercharger. There'll be a common connector, and you can supercharge your Rivian at a Tesla
Oh,
supercharger.
interesting.
Tesla gets money. Tesla gets money, and they also get to advertise because you're going to see a lot of Teslas, and you'll talk to people, and we'll see where it goes. But in the long run, a lot of people believe this is kind of one step. This is kind of the first step because Tesla has its technology is generally more advanced than the others, just because and because Musk is a super smart guy, withstanding whatever negatives you might say, he's a super smart guy.
Right.
And some people think that, for example, in essence, the factory is like a product. They have a specific kind of way they do the factory. And
Right.
they have kind of robots that work within the factory. And that's kind of a product. And I don't know if you've heard, like, there's certain kind of programs, like they have full self-driving. There's a bunch of things they could sell and license to other companies who are behind. But if they could provide that technology, then they could sell their cars.
Right. Right.
So that's besides the fact they're selling the most cars, it seems like in the future they'll also be licensing a lot of their own technology and getting a piece of sales
Right.
of everyone else.
Right.
And over the past probably 6 months, in part because Elon Musk has been out and about meeting with a lot of leaders of countries because he's very popular. Because if you get a factory, you get a lot of jobs and it's money. So he's being wined and dined. And as a result, I think in November of 2022, the stock went down. I think it's November. It might have been December, but it's like 6 months ago. The stock went down as low as 101, and today it closed at 275.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's pretty a sizable run, and a lot of the big tech, the big tech, Apple, Microsoft, those companies, especially the ones that had any AI affiliation, have done really well.
Hmm.
But Tesla part is because they're kind of some of the big companies are kind of surrendering. They're not going to compete. If they're in second place, and so be it. They'll make money and they'll be happy. But
Right.
they've decided that they can't. If you can't beat them, then join them. And for Tesla and Tesla shareholders, I think it means a bright future. And since
Right.
I'm one, again, not financial advice, I think you should take a look at it and do your own due diligence.
So let's stay on this topic because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I read an article the other day that Governor DeSantis down in Florida signed legislation that outlawed direct to consumer sales of automobiles to protect against the dealerships. Have you heard that? Yeah. Yeah, Richard, you froze up. You're roboting. Yeah, and the comments are saying that as well too. I'm going to lose Richard. I have a feeling I'm going to be running this live stream by myself. Here we go. I think what Richard was saying was that that's accurate. That DeSantis did in fact sign that legislation, but Richard is definitely more of he's got a lot more in depth knowledge about Tesla than I do. But it was something that he wanted to talk about. Uh, yeah, Richard, we lost your camera. Now we can't even see you. So yeah. So I did recall reading that the other day. There you are.
All right.
So go ahead and start over with what you said in relation to DeSantis.
That bill is the bill is correct, except it exempts anyone who was already direct selling in the state. So it exempted Tesla, Rivian, and Lucid. So
In,
it was like a friendly, I think, not a friendly to Tesla, not a no no.
Interesting.
And
Well,
a lot of states have that same law. It depends,
yeah,
you know, it depends on a lot on how unionized your state is. If you're like a heavy union state, you're more inclined to protect dealers, and if you're not, you're less inclined.
right.
And there's been a lot of litigation about it, and they've been successful in modifying a lot of those rules because basically in my mind, they're anti-consumer. I understand it's a tough issue because you're getting rid of jobs or you're impacting dealers. I understand that,
Right.
but from a consumer standpoint, you're adding on the consumer's cost and they could save with a direct sales model.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes to show the power of the lobbyist groups because the dealerships have a lobbyist association and that's how it worked. It's very similar to here in Pennsylvania with the beer distributors, up until about 5 years ago, you could not sell beer in a grocery store. And it had been proposed multiple times over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the Beer Distributors Association just fought it tooth and nail. Well, they just could. The tsunami was coming because every state around Pennsylvania, you could, I mean, Maryland, Delaware, you name it, New York, you can go into a grocery store and buy beer. People would come to Pennsylvania and be like, "What do you mean I can't buy beer in a grocery store?" So they just couldn't hold it off anymore. And now in Pennsylvania, you can go into a grocery store, most grocery stores that apply for their alcohol sales and buy beer. So and that's just within the last 2 3 years.
And if you're a teenager, that's a very important thing.
Now they're pretty strict. They card no matter what. It doesn't matter. No matter how old you look, they want to see your driver's license and they scan it in. So
Actually, I always thought those signs were funny. 7-Eleven had like a sign. I remember the sign. I just thought it was funny. It said, "If you look 25, if you are 25 or older, we're going to ask for your ID." And I was
Yeah.
wondering, how do you make the initial decision where you're 25 and older? They have to ask for your ID to first make sure you're over 25.
25.
Your ID again to verify it. I just
Yeah.
thought it was a funny sign.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, um, anytime you want to know about Tesla, I will give you more info. And I'm going to do a separate video on that Girardi matter because I thought it was really interesting and kind of, again, just
Yeah.
an interesting story, but also just the regulatory lack of concern. It was concerning. Are you
Yes,
Yellowstone?
Jennifer. Yes, Jennifer. It's me, Jr.
What does the Yellowstone refer to?
That's Rip. That was the one profile I used. I get goofy and change my profile on Twitter every for the weekend, just something silly. And I used Rip one time. So
I see.
from Yellowstone, Rip from Yellowstone.
I see. Okay.
So
Anything else you want to talk about, or any of the comments you want to address?
I've been trying to keep up with the comments. I thought maybe I could type answers at the same time, but it just was not. It wasn't to be. It's just too difficult because I'm not really seeing. They're talking about Alpine. Sorry, was busy chatting. Judge said about MMTLP. We already addressed that one. I'm waiting for it to hit 65 cents. I'm not sure what they're talking about there. Do you, Richard or JR, think FINRA was shorting MMTLP in their employee retirement accounts? I will tell you, if you're talking about their employee retirement accounts, I can't. I would say probably not. I mean, FINRA's employees aren't governmental employees. I don't think they have a pension plan. I don't know, but I mean, yeah, I employee retirement accounts are unique in that the assets actually belong to the employee. So if the company goes belly up, those assets aren't touched by bankruptcy. That's the assets of the employee. I don't think if they had a 401k plan that they could air quote short. Now their 401k plan might have allowed for share lending, but I don't think they would have been able to short stocks in the employees' retirement accounts.
But let's assume for the sake let's assume they thought they were going to. They considered it. I think they would have known when most of the shorting occurred, based upon like the FOIA reply. They
Right.
kind of already knew that this was an issue. And I would think if I was general counsel and somebody said, "Is it okay if we short MMTLP?" I think somebody would say, "No, it's not,"
Yeah.
because that might some kind of major conflict of interest. Now we know that that may not still have stopped them, if they were so inclined, but
Right.
I would expect that they might be a little more careful than that. But we don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, you don't know. And you don't know for a multitude of reasons. Number one, we're not employees of FINRA. But number two, this is the most not transparent federal agency on the face of the planet. So, and that brings me to another point. Let me read a text that I had sent someone because, I think this puts it in perspective about what all these communities are doing. GTII, Mullen, Big, name them. Pull MMTLP, AMC, GME, it doesn't matter. But
Uh-oh. Now you stopped. I can continue until you come back. So in he raised Mullen, and while he unfreezes or doesn't, um, this some time back that I was concerned about some of the discussion that happened in Mullen, and there was some agreement that. Oh, there you are. Now you can continue because I was
so,
babbling.
the text reply that I sent back is, we are attempting to make changes to the largest financial institution known to mankind. And so, the fight that we're in, what we're trying to do with pressuring Congress, pressuring regulators, talking on these spaces every single day. And again, you and I are both knee deep in MMTLP. That's the community that I feel as though I belong to. But when you look at the larger picture of all these communities that are now starting to form and now starting to communicate like MMTLP has, Drew made a really good point last night to Will, because Will had said, "Well, I never know when there's a space going or blah 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 blah." And Drew's like, "Wait, there's literally a space going in the MMTLP community 24/7." And you're starting to see more of these spaces in these other communities. This thing that we're in, this change that we're attempting to make, it is to the largest financial institution and system known to the planet, and known to history of all humankind. So it's not going to be easy. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be heartbreak along the way. But if we continue to push, and you and I continue to have conversations like this, and we continue to have spaces, we continue to see people like Mark come into the community, and other people start to talk and engage and try to make change, we're going to make change. It's going to be in slow increments, but the proof is in the pudding, because now we've seen Savvy charged with naked short selling. We've seen it acknowledged in a federal bankruptcy court. So for everyone out there feeling a little bit discouraged or feeling like the end isn't anywhere in sight, this was never going to be easy. When we first started those spaces back in December, no one knew this is where we would be today. So yeah, that's my little soapbox. But I thought it was important as I was reading one of the comments on here. So sorry.
And it's spoken this, one difference about now today versus in the past is social media. So we know, like, there's been literally, I think in China and elsewhere, there were protests where they were able to communicate amongst the people that were
Yeah.
interested through those communication means. They were able to organize. And I kind of see social media as a way for retail investors in particular to have a way to organize.
Yeah.
And it's different than in the past. Because 20 years ago, if the same situation popped up, there would be no way for retail investors to have any kind of continuity.
Yeah.
It was just not possible.
Yeah.
And I think that in our mind, the bad guys have adjusted to that. And I agree with you. At some point in time, we're obviously, anything's possible, of course. But as I expect, at some point in time, there will be a resolution. And as we have spoken, the problem is, and the unfortunate part is, we just can't predict the time frame.
Right.
And I know for the people that are super distressed, and there are a lot of people, I understand, that's not really solace of anything, because they need assistance now.
Right.
But we're still optimistic, even if it is longer than we expect. And
Yeah.
again, that gets back kind of where we started. A lot of us were growing impatient because of we wanted others to act more aggressively.
Right.
And as I discussed at the beginning, it seems like hopefully that will be starting now, and I think that will also help at least expediting some resolution. And
Right.
just like Mark was suggesting, he was filing a new action. I'm sure there's going to be new actions sprouting up all over the place on all kinds of different grounds,
Right.
and doesn't help those that need it today, but I still think there'll be a positive resolution.
Right. Yeah, I do too. I mean, it's just a matter of time. And I hate to say it, patience sometimes is a virtue. But I'm sympathetic to the people that are struggling in this community, because I talk to them. I mean, I was texting with one an hour before this started. So I mean, I hate to be corny, but sometimes you gotta suck it up and turn that frown upside down and push through another day. And that's not to be, not empathetic, but this is a fight. We know it's a fight. We're now almost 7 months into this. uh, I think there's going to be, as you and I talk, the evidence is going to bubble up. It's going to bubble up at some point. We don't know when, we don't know how. And like you and I talked last time, the solution might be something that none of us have even talked about. None of us have even thought about. It could come out of the blue, out of nowhere, and everyone goes, "Oh, holy shit, there it is." It's just one of those things. I think again, I feel very positive about Mark on appeal. The fact that he mentioned it today. There's other avenues that are being explored, and not only explored by him, but explored by other people. So again, it's just a matter of time before they get into that round room and start really looking for a corner and can't find it. And when
Yeah,
that happens, it'll be over.
and
So
and and the flip side is, you know, even if you're pissed off, try not to abandon the cause, because
yeah,
again, I'm going to say the quote unquote the bad guys. That's what they're trying for. They want to
exactly,
they want to wear everybody out. They want
exactly.
they want people to fall by the wayside and just forget about it. And the only thing we have under our own control is to do the opposite. Stay
Exactly.
stay for the fight until it's done.
That's right.
And there's a lot of people that are still pushing forward. And even though some days are tough, we've had our tough days, just
Hmm.
just keep on pushing. And again, like I said, even if you're pissed off, or especially if you're pissed off, don't give them the satisfaction of giving up.
That's right. That's right. And the other thing is, and you and I talk about this because I just told you I'm taking a break over the weekend. I need to get refocused. I had some yard work I needed to do, get caught up on some things around the house, and I did. And I wasn't on Spaces all day. I jumped on a space because I knew Mark was going to be talking about some things. But had Mark not talked about things, I probably wouldn't have been on a space all day. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I always find myself coming back, and I find myself coming back because of the people and the community.
Right.
And I know you, and you and I talk about this. This is where we need to be. This is what we need to do. So
Yeah.
I'm not leaving, and I'm not stopping until this is over. And even after it's over, I may not stop. Uh, you and I've talked about this before. I refound that flame that put me in law school to begin with.
Right.
So for me, this has become bigger and more than MMTLP. So
Yeah. Yeah. Me too, and probably a lot of other people that are, similarly situated that have decided, it's a cause worth fighting for,
yeah.
notwithstanding whatever our interest is personally in it. But it's certainly a cause worth fighting for.
Well, it's if you think about it, it's and you and I can literally say this. It is grassroots from day one, and we were at day one, and not a whole lot. And let forget forget about where we're at right now, but look 20 years in the future. If we're successful in not only getting a resolution for MMTLP, but having significant changes on the market for the betterment of retail, which really is Main Street. This was a movement. We can
Right.
look back and say it was a movement, and take pride that we changed something in this country for the betterment. And Johnny T was talking about that today.
Good old, good
we're
old.
we're yeah, good old Johnny Tobacco, right? Only on Twitter I can call someone Johnny Tobacco with a straight face. So yeah, it's amazing. So it
Yeah.
really is.
I always thought just being able to hold a group together under that stress on Twitter, really,
Mhm.
every day, notwithstanding the ups and downs, that, eventually you'll teach a course on how to kind of manage a group like that to be able to stay and be effective. Because
Yeah,
it's obviously we've had our experience. It's
yeah,
certainly not easy, but it's pretty amazing that, it's been held together this long.
yeah.
And
And still being held together. I mean, look at the number. I always look at the numbers on some of these spaces. Mark's space today had upwards of 800 people at one point. So the people are out there. The people want to get educated. The people want to be involved. We just need to stay focused on obviously the resolution for MMTLP, but the larger picture.
right, right.
So so
Alrighty. I
all
think
right.
we've done our thing. We'll
Yep.
we'll plan on doing another one maybe next week
Yeah.
when
Sounds good.
when the time's right. Have a good day. Take care of
All right.
yourself.
Yep. You too, Richard. Talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.